Was good, y'all? Track Kennedy with StudioSounds.com back with a brand new tutorial. In this video, I'll be breaking down a beat I did the other day that was influenced by Travis Scott. The beat wasn't influenced by any one particular song, just different concepts I heard through Astroworld that I wanted to put my own spin on. The intro features a Pimp C interview clip I found just to give it that Houston connection, and it also has a different sample in the intro that I made, which isn't used throughout the beat again, just to mimic that dramatic change up that you hear on Astroworld kind of frequently. The track is in the key of G sharp harmonic minor, and I only use Stardust and Rosaries for all the instruments you hear in this. The drums are from various drum kits, and I'll break those down as we get into those sections, but without further talking, let's take a listen to the beat from the top and jump into this tutorial.
Out here driving all this shit, man, and doing it like this, man. You got to know I got the air guard on my side, man. There ain't nothing else they can do these things. Hey, look at this thing, man. Man, this boy today.
So for this particular beat, I'm going to go ahead and just start with the hook section, move through the verse, and just break down the intro at the end. So for this beat, I just haven't used our Stardust bank in a while for Serum. We're dropping new products constantly, so I always end up using those. But I really like this bank, so I want to just kind of go back to it and make a beat with it. So the very first sound that I picked was from Serum and from the Stardust bank called the Busted Harp. And I just laid down a very simple little chord progression, and here's what it sounds like by itself. So basically I have my chords down here and then just some accent notes on top. But if we take a look at the actual chords, it's all relatively simple. It just starts off with a G sharp minor chord. The root note stays the same. You just move these up basically by one note to the next notes in the scale. Then you bring it down one note directly down, build a chord from there. And then I just repeated the same chord over again towards the end. So really simple. And then for this, I just picked different notes basically from the chords to move them to the top and make it a little bit more interesting, which it looks like it worked out just to be all the center notes. Just moved them up one octave, copied them over, and then I went ahead and I just reduced the levels on that just so it's not as bright. And then if we take a look at the whole thing, it has a very, very slight strum on it. So I'm not sure if those are the settings I used, but if you just take a look at it, just a very slight little strum throughout the different pieces. But that just helps to make it sound a little bit more natural in my opinion, that little strum. But when you combine it all together is what you have again. So using that G sharp harmonic minor scale just allows you to kind of pick up some chords that have almost like an eerie, creepy type feel to it. When I'm doing Travis stuff, I'm usually using harmonic minor, or I'm using a pure minor scale if I want it to be like that more melodic type sound. But yeah, so this is kind of how I built everything. I usually start with a chord progression. This was it. Let's jump to the next section. I'll show you guys what comes next. So once I had that section down, I wanted to continue layering. So I found another plug called the Dusty Sprites from Stardust in Serum. And then I basically just copied the chords down, but I moved this little second note out just to change up the timing slightly. And then I basically just play this little top end melody, except for this little section over here where the notes didn't come directly from the chords, just because I felt like it sounded better. But these over here are directly from the chords again, just kind of like a little step down, and then just turn down the velocity on these just to make them a little bit more background for that little section. But when you combine it with the other sounds, what you end up with. I thought that Dusty Sprite sound just kind of fit in there well because it has that kind of cool melodic synth type sound, but also has some kind of grit and some dust on it. So I thought that just worked well with that whole Travis Scott type sound. And these actually are just bass lines. We can get rid of these because they weren't used in this section anyway. But the last and final thing that was actually used for the little sample section is the Hazy Mallets. And what I did for this again was I took the same chords and I had copied them down here, and I just took the top end notes and I moved them down an octave. So I ended up with something like this. And then I just took the whole thing up, just kind of filling a different frequency. And then I believe I also put a little strum on these. Yeah, it's kind of like a reverse strum. So if you take a look at, instead of going up, it's actually going down like that. But when you combine everything, that's what you end up with. So I thought that was like a cool little section to start off with. It had a little bit of melody, but wasn't kind of overdone. I could still add stuff to that. So the next thing I wanted to do was just use the patterns and do a quick render as audio clip. So that's what I ended up doing, and ended up with this down here. And that has some filters on it, but basically that's the main sample. And then what you need is just a slicer to go ahead and import that into. So let's jump in the next section. I'll show you guys how this was kind of chopped up and the reasoning for everything. So basically, once I had that rendered out as an audio clip, I just imported it into the slicer. In here, I usually just select the normal setting, and then I'll just go to the beat slicing, and then make sure this is just on tonal. And then I took it all the way down, so 1200 cents, just to make it lower and change the octave of it. And I took the slice fade in to around 5 seconds, and then the out to around 10 milliseconds, I believe that is. I think I said seconds, so it should be milliseconds. But anyway, took that out just to give it a little bit more of a chopped sample feel. And I basically laid in this pattern, which is the exact same pattern that's playing. I didn't really like chop or do anything different to it. But when you add it and run it through the Slice X, this is what you, or excuse me, this is not even Slice X. This is just the Fruity Slicer. This is what you end up with. So it just has a much darker feel on it. And then I also added some effects to this. So I just have a Maximus where I just turned up the post gain just to make it a little bit louder basically. Then I threw a reverb on it with these kind of settings, turn the wetness up a little bit. Let's kind of see what's going on here if you want to copy that. And then just threw an EQ on it and got rid of basically just the super low lows that I don't need, which my bass line will basically fill in later. So that was kind of what happened there. And then from there, I basically just went ahead and copied the same pattern again, same Fruity Slicer. But for this one, I kept it basically at 0, the pitch. So these will still line up. And for this one, I laid down the exact same pattern, turned it all the way up. And then this is on effects channel 18, which has a super heavy EQ on it. This is kind of like a little layer that I'm going to add in here, which just kind of helps to bring some ambience to the sound, but it's not really meant to like do anything insane. And then I threw a reverb on here, just kind of make it a little bit more spaced out. Took the dryness down to around 75, just to wash the sound out a little bit, excuse me. These are the other settings in here. Took the size all the way down, or actually not all the way down, but around 8, 9, almost all the way down. And then I threw a pancake on it, just so that it'll go ahead and pan from side to side automatically. But when you combine those two patterns, this is what you end up with. You guys hear it right there at the end by itself, and then with this again, just gives it a little bit of shine. Just makes it a little bit more interesting to listen to, in my opinion. So that layer was kind of like the foundation for the hook section. So let's jump in the next section. I'll show you guys what comes after this. So once I had that down, the next thing I actually added to this was the bass lines. For the actual hook section, I wanted to use kind of like a bassline pluck. You'll hear those throughout Travis's tracks, usually in like intros or hooks, and then for the verses, we'll switch back to an 808 or like a heavier bass line. So I want to just kind of mimic that sound. So what I did was I pulled up this little pluck bass one from Astro World again, and I basically just played different notes from the chords. So you see the root note, and then for the second note, instead of playing this these two notes again, basically for the root, I just took it up to the second note in the chord that I played there and just used those for some variation, then the root note again, and then come back to the root note again. So pretty simple. And this is just the first plug, but with the track, that's what it sounds like. So it starts to give the track a little bit of shape and helps to kind of bring it together a little bit. And I'm one of those people who likes to actually layer plucks. So the next thing I did was I used the plug bass 3 again from Astro World, and I layered the exact same notes to it again just to make it thicker for the hook section. So here's what it sounds like. Helps to fill the sound out a little bit more and give it a little bit more presence, in my opinion. The next thing was just like this little pluck sound that I found. It's like a little bend, the pluck bender from Astro World again. And if you take a look at this, this is basically just the top notes of the chords. So if you guys remember, the first chord would have been these 3 notes. Just took the top 2 and kind of cascade them down. The same thing over here as well. Same thing. And then repeat. But when you add that, it just helps to add like a little brightness to the sound. Here's what it sounds like. So after that point, I felt like the track was really taking shape. I wasn't sure if I wanted to add more to it and just keep it like that, but then I found this next little sound and I just thought it fit very well in here without kind of doing too much. And this was the nice bell sound, and I'll go ahead and just play this for you guys quick, and then I'll show you guys how I created this. And this is from Stardust again, but here's what it sounds like. So if you're kind of paying attention, that's the exact same chords again, just kind of playing the notes down over here. But this particular sound has like a little bend on it. So how you would want to create that actual bend is I use effect tricks, but you can use probably anything that has like a vinyl slowdown. I set this to 1/16. Here are my other settings if you want to copy those. I don't think I even messed with these. I think it was just the timing. And then I drew in little patterns like this. So when it gets to this little section, you have that slight little slowdown that you heard on Astro World as well. So pretty simple, just a lot of clicking, nothing really that's going to be too difficult about that. Add another reverb, just kind of make it match the track. Turn the wetness all the way up. Size, I believe the dryness level. So it looks like I actually turned the dry level down as well to probably around 90, just to keep the bell in focus somewhat, but still give it that kind of spacey sound that you hear throughout the track. This next sound, this gross beat, was actually never used, so we can just kind of actually eliminate that fully. And then just another pancake effect just to have it move from side to side. I really like this plugin in general. It just really helps to, I feel like you can take like a very, very simple sound and just with some panning and some little stereo effects, it can just make it way more interesting. So that's kind of why you see me use this a ton. I feel like you can take the most simplest stuff and just make it more interesting, which helps any beat. But anyway, when you combine all that, again, this is what you have. And then from that section, it's going to basically just be a little transition effect. So on pattern 19, I have another little transition effects from Stardust, and this is just the effects riser 3. So it has like that little tail end. It doesn't just fade in fade out right as you kind of let the note go, which I felt like would just be a cool little transition into the verse. So I have that right there. And then I just have like a reverse crash in here as well. So basically to create that, just reverse the cymbal right here, stretch it to 2 beats, make sure it's on generic so the actual pitch of the sound doesn't change. And then I also added a gross beat to this with sped up gate just to make it a little bit more dramatic. But when you add those transition effects, that's what you end up with. So simple but effective in my opinion. And then from there it's going to move into the verse. And just this little section right here, this is just like a basic crash right here, nothing really. Just kind of shortened it up a little bit. And this is a crash from the Legends Never Die kit. I don't know if I mentioned that. This and the reverse crash is the same sound from the Legends Never Die drum kit. But when you combine it, that's what you end up with. So all pretty simple patterns in my opinion, but when you combine it all, you just get a nice kind of fuller section for the hook. So from there, we can actually move on to the verse. Let's jump in the next section. I'll start breaking down that. So once the track actually moves to the verse, there's like a new sample that I created for the verse section just to make it a little bit more different. And the way that I created that was using rosaries and an omnisphere. Basically, rosaries is our new omnisphere bank, and I used 4 sounds from here, just kind of layer. So the first sound it's just a bell. It's the Xylo synth, and when you take a look at it, it's basically just playing like an arpeggio of the actual chords that we had initially in the other patterns as well. It's kind of coming up and then coming back down, but by itself is what you end up with. So I thought that was like a cool organic sound, but I wanted to add to that. So what I did was I took the same exact pattern and I just took it down here to this sound called the melodic sonar and layered those two together to kind of end up with something like this. So I thought that was like a cool foundation piece, but it needed something else on top. So I started layering some other little melodies on top, just kind of by ear. The first one was the Hazy Mallets, and I just kind of played different notes that I found throughout the chords and just try to kind of stack them in interesting ways. So if you kind of take a look at it, the majority of it is directly from the chords, but it's just kind of switched up with the timing. And then these are just shorter notes that are just up an octave. There's nothing really too difficult about that. But when you combine that with the other pieces, what you end up with. And I kind of like the melody of that, but I felt like it could just be slightly more bright. So what I did was I layered this spacey kalimba, and I basically used those same exact sounds, but just moved them up an octave. So that, in my opinion, wasn't too pretty melodically. It still had a little bit of grime. It's a little bit imperfect, but that would just kind of work well with that Travis Scott type sound. So once I was happy with that, I just went to patterns again, quick renders audio clip, and I exported that down to 22 and imported it into the slicer. So let's jump in the next section. I'll show you guys more about how the verse comes together from there. So once the pattern was actually exported out, I basically just dragged it into the Fruity Slicer, as I said. Normal, sliced it by beat, tonal, and just like laid in the exact same pattern. Didn't really chop it or change it up much, but I just wanted to have that little chopped feel more so than I wanted to actually change it up much. So maybe you can kind of hear that, but it gives it like that little chopped up feel where it's just slightly imperfect, and you hear that throughout Astro World, and that's kind of what I was looking for in this. So it's on effects channel 21. Let me just take a look at what we have there. So just a reverb, kind of slight on this one. Another EQ, getting rid of a lot of the low end, and then I just turn the sound up, or excuse me, just the volume up, basically the level, just so it's a little bit louder than it was, to kind of break through the mix. And then I just have like another pancake, but I just use like, I believe this is called like the slight left or something like that. Left to right shy actually is what it is. So it's just like a very slight panning, but it just helps make the sound a little bit more stereo. But yeah, so those are the three effects, and that's kind of how this track started. From there, I also layered this little top section, which is just like the bottom end of the sample that we did for the hook. And what I did was I just basically, instead of keeping the full thing running, I just used like the little first section of each chord progression, just to keep it somewhat familiar from the hook and not have it be completely different, and then just use that to layer over the top of this. So it kind of basically goes from here. And then from there we basically have drums. So I have the Spins 808. If you know me or anything about my sound, you know I did not use this sound for a good 6 years just because everybody was using it. Then a couple weeks ago I downloaded it just to kind of see what the hype was about, really, and just to see how it fit into the mix. And you know, you gotta excuse the pun, but I basically fell into the trap of using this a ton. So you'll kind of see the sound used throughout my next couple of beats until I get sick of it, and I'll move on to something else. But yeah, so basically this is just the Spins 808 that everybody kind of knows about, and this is kind of the pattern it's playing, just kind of following along with the different chords and what's going on there. So when we add the 808 to the track, that's what you end up with. Then from there, I added a clap from the Submarine drum kit, clap 5. Pretty simple, just kind of start building the groove. Then I found a hat pattern from our Grand Prix MIDI kit, which is basically just a bunch of MIDI files for hi-hats and stuff like that. I found one that kind of worked, and then I believe I just made slight little tweaks to it with just removing a couple of the rolls to make it fit in here better. But this was kind of basically the pattern that I ended up sticking with. And this is from the Submarine drum kit. This is a closed hat too. And then I just added a quick little second hi-hat to that just to help with the groove a little bit. I kind of like stacking hi-hats, just one thing I've always done for a little while. So this is pretty simple, but when you combine it with the track, that's what you end up with. And then for this little section right here, I just decided to add this little chant basically from Phone Home. It's like a little scream sound, just kind of help with the little transition piece. The little second section of the hook, of the verse gets a little bit more busy, so that helps just kind of move it along. So that's kind of my punchy kick pattern right here. This is from the Legends Never Die drum kit again, and just shortened it up and then just made sure it pitch matched, the 808. So that's all you see right there. Then from there, I have like this open hat, pretty simple. And this is from the Grand Prix kit again, just a MIDI file from there that I kind of basically just changed slightly to make the track fit a little bit better, but I felt for like this little second section it would just work in here to make it a little bit more busy. And then what I did was I basically just took all the first drum parts off. Basically I just shortened the patterns up, so initially they would have been like this, but I just shortened them up right here to basically have the drums start where the clap is, and then I used that little 2-beat reverse crash just to kind of fill it in, make it a little bit more dramatic, so when it actually moves to that part, that's what you end up with. And then from there, it's going to move into the verse, but there's still a couple little things we got to just cover in here quickly. So on pattern 21, we have this little brass hit, and this is from Stardust again. This is the lo-fi brass hit, so basically it just plays one little note over here to make this little drop a little bit more dramatic. So that's pretty much the verse section. As you can tell, just a couple of different patterns, slight little changes to make it a little bit more interesting. Kept kind of like the short verse trend that's kind of popular right now, and kept it in this beat. But you could obviously extend this out if you wanted to, or make it 16 or whatever you wanted to for the artist. And basically the only thing that's really left from here is the intro piece. So let's jump to the next section. I'll break that down for you guys. So for this intro section, I have this little sample playing over the top of it, and this was initially my verse pattern, but I didn't really end up liking it for a verse, so I ended up just making this an intro and then this the verse. So basically what this is just 3 little serum patterns. The first one is the KB high grand, just kind of playing this, which if you kind of take a close look at it, for the most part, it's kind of similar to the same chords that we used earlier, just changed up slightly, but by itself is what it sounds like. Pretty simple. The next thing that I added to this was basically this little organ sound, and this is the KB organ 1 from Stardust again. And then the last thing I added was this little lead. For this, all I did was I went ahead and I copied and pasted down these chords to this, and then I went into like this little arpeggiator section and kind of had it play different settings till I found something I liked. I didn't really want this to be too perfect because the plan from the beginning was to chop it up, but when you add everything together for these 3 is what you end up with. So I thought that was cool, but I wanted to go ahead and chop it up. So I took the entire pattern to 8, or I guess down here, and I created something like this. So same exact pattern, just went ahead and pitched it all the way down. Then the next thing I did was took the same exact pattern that I exported out and I pitched it all the way up, and then I basically just selected different little pieces to kind of highlight with that from the first pattern that I had. So it's basically from here, just kind of playing different things from that pattern to kind of accent it. And for this one, I threw a bunch of kind of heavier effects on this, a heavier EQ, the same heavy reverb, just so it kind of lingers and has that ambiance, and the same pancake effect, just so it moves from side to side. Then from here, we have basically drums, the same exact patterns from over here, same exact hi-hat pattern from over here as well. 2 little transition effects, which is just a little scream and then just the reverse crash. And then I also added a filter over the top of this on the master channel. And the filter that I actually ended up using was like the old telephone. And I just I believe I made slight tweaks to it just so it wasn't as bright. And I added this just for the intro, just kind of make it seem like a whole different song. And then lastly, I just found like this little Pimp C clip that I wanted to put in here, just kind of give it that Texas feel. So I went ahead and I chopped up his little interview section and just laid it over this little intro piece. But when you combine everything, this is what you end up with finally.
How can a nigga come home from the pen for 4 years, ain't got no air out here driving all this shit, man, and doing it like this, man? You got to know I got the air guard on my side, man. There ain't nothing else they can do these days. Hey, look at this thing, man. Man, this boy is dangerous.
And that pretty much does it for this beat. It just kind of goes back into the same stuff that we've already covered. So if you want to pick up any of these kits or banks, make sure you use the YouTube discount code that you can find in the description. Thank you for watching. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video for more. My name is Track Kennedy. Until next time, studiosounds.com.